Welcome to Down Ancient Trails, the online archaeology forum of the Sharma Center for Heritage Education, India. Brush the dust off long forgotten thoughts. Slice through time and space.
Listen to stories in stone.
Whispers of voices lost in time.
Build bridges across worlds.
Curious minds reach out to the past. And travel down ancient trails.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll start the slides. There we go. Okay, so in 2013, this is now 7 years ago, um, our team began work in the Rising Star cave system. And I'm going to talk mostly about Rising Star today. I will be looking forward to questions that you might ask about our work in Rising Star, but you can also ask some other questions if you know about my work from other things, or if you have broader questions. I'm happy to address big topics. I'm going to try to address some big topics through our work at Rising Star. And that's because this cave discovery really came to us as a major surprise in many ways. Um, Illustrated here on the screen is the most complete of the cranial specimens that we found from the site. This is the LES-1 specimen. We named him Neo from the Lesedi Chamber, and it's part of our second discovery at the cave system. I'm going to take you back to that point of discovery in 2013, just to review where our discovery came from and how it came about, and the unique situation that was in place that required us to come up with some very unique solutions to different kinds of problems with our excavation. Okay, so this is the Rising Star landscape. This is the area just above the cave system. The orange building here is our field station now at the Rising Star site. I can tell you that the site lies on a property that has been acquired by a public trust foundation, so that it's now protected in perpetuity. But when we arrived there, it was on private property, and we worked with the landowners for permission to work at the site. The discovery was made by these two guys. This is Rick Hunter in the front and Steve Tucker in the background. These two guys were amateur speleologists, as they call them in South Africa, or we might call them cavers or spelunkers. They were working with the Caving Society in South Africa, and their interest was exploring caves. These two guys were in their early 20s, and they were, trying to find new places in caves that were worth exploring. They also had begun working with our team, including Professor Lee Berger, to identify whether there were caves that had bones in them that were worth investigating. And so what I'm going to do is show you the video that we have. This video represents the first time that these guys entered the cave system. This was the video that they wore on their helmets, and they're going into a chamber that was unknown. It was not on any maps at the time, and you can see their bones on the floor of the chamber. This is the chamber that became known as the Dinaledi Chamber. And I'll show you some of the original photographs. This photograph of a part of a skull that is in the floor of the cave. This photograph of a partial mandible that was right on the floor of the cave system. They brought these photographs out of the cave system. They showed them to their collaborator, Pedro Boshoff, who was a student in geology at Wits University in South Africa, and to my friend Lee Berger, who was a paleoanthropologist and very well-known National Geographic Society explorer at the University of the Witwatersrand. And we could see immediately when they sent these photos to me, when they sent them to other colleagues, we could see that this was something very interesting. This is a mandible. It's clearly a hominin mandible, and it's clearly not the mandible of a modern human. The proportions of the jaw and the teeth are totally wrong for that, right? So we looked at this and we said, there's something very significant here. So my friend Lee organized within the space of a month an excavation of this cave system. And I'm going to explain to you the difficulty of this. I want to first express, as I always do, that our project is led in South Africa. It is directed from the University of Witwatersrand. I participate as a visiting researcher at the University of Witwatersrand. And all of our team is headquartered in South Africa with international colleagues from around the world. Okay, so the Rising Star Cave system is more than 2 kilometers of underground passageways underneath a hillside which is composed of dolomitic limestone. And what I'm going to mostly talk about is some relatively small areas of the cave system. This cross-section of part of the cave system shows the major constraints for our team as we reach and excavate the area where those bones were found in the photographs that you saw, the Dinaledi Chamber. The Dinaledi Chamber you see here at bottom left of the screen, it is separated from the surrounding areas of the cave system by a very narrow passageway, which is around 18 centimeters in its minimum dimension. That narrow passageway we call the chute. It is a vertical passage that is extremely difficult to pass through. There are other narrow passageways in the cave system that constrain our team. The Superman's Crawl is one of the most famous of those. It's called Superman's Crawl because our team, in order to pass through it, has got to lie on their stomachs and go through forward with one arm up and one arm down, like Superman. And so that's another major constraint through the cave system. That one has a width of a little bit under 30 centimeters. So it's not quite as terrible. And in fact, I can fit through that. I do not fit through the chute. And in fact, most normal sized people do not. And so it is an extremely difficult sort of thing to do. The chute is 12 meters in height. And so it is really a major athletic event to pass through this. So how would we do it? Lee put on Facebook an announcement. We're going to do this excavation and we'd like some volunteers to do this. And the catch is that these volunteers have got to be able to come to South Africa next month. They have got to be experienced in excavation. So they all have to be archaeologists or archaeology students of some kind. And they all have to have the right skill set to climb through this cave. And that includes being skinny. And so all of these things were put together. And this team of 6 archaeologists came to work with us. As you can see, they came from all over the world. Marina Elliott, who is pictured there in the center, has for the last several years been instrumental in running and underground work in the Rising Star Cave system. All of these initially archaeology students have in the intervening time earned their PhDs or have moved on to ecology. Hannah Morris on the right is now working on ecology. And so all of these folks came to work with us and were just a wonderful team working underground in the excavation. This is Lee Berger's daughter at the top, actually, who was instrumental in helping us, Rick Hunter at the bottom. And I'll just show you a little bit of video of the excavation underway in 2013. Unlike most cave systems in South Africa, the fossil material in the Rising Star Cave system that we have worked with so far is not encased in a mineralized breccia context. most fossils in South Africa are hard rock and are embedded in rock. The Rising Star Cave system has fossil bone that is embedded within a soft, very fine particle clay sediment. And that sediment, excavating it, is like excavating a normal archaeological site in sediment. You see our team working here, Marina in the front with a plastic spoon and with paintbrushes, Hannah Morris in the background working with similar tools. So it's, very standard excavation situation in a very extraordinary place. And you can see Hannah in the background there working on what looks like a jumble of bones. In fact, as we began to investigate the cave system, our excavation initially was collection and mapping of material collected from the surface of this cave chamber, the Dinaledi Chamber. As we began to work on the skull that you saw in the photograph embedded in the sediment, we found immediately that the skull was surrounded by, sitting on top of, embedded within a lot of additional bone material. And that bone material comprised a feature that our team excavated for 1 month underground. Most people who have read about our discovery and know about the quantity of fossil material that we've recovered imagine that this is, some very large thing, like in Hadar when they excavate the Lucy skeleton or something like that. They move an enormous amount of rock and sediment. That is not the case in this cave situation. We are working on very delimited, small features that are very dense in bone material. Initially, as we found out very quickly, our expectations, I have to say, when we began the excavation, were that we would find maybe parts of one skeleton. We were looking at photographs, at video. We could see that there was, a substantial number of bones on the surface of the cave, but it did not strike us that there was going to be an enormous, sort of number of individuals represented there. We thought we were working on a skeleton. And so it was a surprise to us as we quickly discovered that there were more than one skeleton there. At the present time, I can tell you that our minimum number of individuals in the Dinaledi Chamber is 18, and in larger parts of the nearby cave system, we have more than 25 individuals represented. And so we have really an enormous array of individuals from a context that is unique. We haven't found a context like this in South Africa before. Okay, so that was a surprise to us that we were looking at lots of skeletons. As we began to work on the anatomy of the skeletons, it also became a surprise to us that we were looking at something that was unmatched in the fossil record, something that had anatomical features that we had not discovered before in South Africa. This was also a surprise to us. I have to say that my expectation was that we would find a partial skeleton of Australopithecus robustus or Africanus or something. We thought, oh, we're going to find something that we found at Sterkfontein Cave, which is 2 kilometers away, or at Swartkrans Cave, which is 800 meters from our site. So, we sort of had an expectation of what we'd find. We did not find that. As bones came out of the cave, and as I and others of my colleagues looked at them, we said, whoa, this is not what we've seen before. Different parts of the skeleton look like different things. So let me give you a very brief tour of some parts of the skeleton. We're really fortunate at this site to have most of the anatomy of Homo naledi represented, and most of it represented in multiple individuals. So we have, many different bones. We have 100 and now more than 150 hand and wrist bones from the site. We have more than 120 foot bones from the site. So we have really a tremendous array of material. This is the most complete hand Our team found this in articulation in the site. You can see there on the left our excavation photo of the hand in situ, and the fingers are curled in sort of this death pose. And you can see on the right reconstruction of the hand in anatomical orientation. The hand bones are a microcosm of what's interesting about this species, about this sample. You can see here that the thumb and fingers are proportioned very much like a human's thumb and fingers are. The thumb is long, it's not short like a chimpanzee's thumb. In fact, it's slightly longer on average than a modern human's thumb, so it's very stout and well proportioned. You can see the anatomy of the metacarpal at the base of the thumb. If anybody does hand anatomy, I've got to tell you that this metacarpal, that the bone in the palm that connects the thumb with the wrist, that metacarpal has an anatomy that we've never seen ever before in the fossil record. It has a very narrow base. It has a very wide distal end. It has very distinct ridges upon it. And that's really strongly muscled, but also is really interestingly configured with a very broad joint for the thumb that we haven't seen in the fossil record before. And we might have thought of this as being a unique individual, but we have now 8 of these metacarpals with identical anatomy from different individuals in the site, from young juveniles to adults, that all have the same anatomical features. So it's a very good sign that we're looking at something that is anatomically very coherent. It's showing us the same picture. You can see that the finger bones, the phalanges of the fingers here, are quite curved. They're not straight and flat like a human's are. They're very curved. Yet the fingertips, the thumb tip that you see there, the fingertips, are very broad, and that indicates that they have these distal apical tufts that are very similar to humans and are uniquely human among our close relatives. Australopithecus afarensis doesn't have these. So it's a configuration that is a human-like hand in many respects, that has some very primitive features to the hand and some very unique features. The foot is almost entirely modern in its morphology. It's a small foot. In American sizes, it's a size 4.5 foot. It's about a 20 to 22 centimeter long foot in all. And you can see here the toes, the lateral toes, the second through the fifth digits, are not here on this foot. We do have those bones, and so we have a mostly complete foot in this instance. The big toe is aligned with the other toes. It is relatively long and matches the other toes. It's a bipedal foot, in other words. The point of showing you the image at the bottom here and at the right is to show you the arches of the foot. You can see that it forms transverse and longitudinal arches, very much like a human foot does. It's a human foot in its anatomy, with slightly longer toes that are slightly curved. And so it does have some primitive aspects, some aspects that we rarely see in humans today. The brain and skull are very different from modern humans and very similar to much more ancient relatives of ours. This is one of the most complete of the crania. You see it here in a mirror reconstruction, and it gives you an idea of what it looks like and its size. In size, this skull is about 450 milliliters in its endocranial volume. That is about 1/3 the size of a modern human today. It is comparable in size to Australopithecus africanus from South Africa. It's comparable in size to earlier Australopiths. It is smaller than Homo habilis, or certainly much smaller than Homo erectus. And so when we look across the skeleton, we see this array of features that are a mixture of features that are present in living people, that are not present ever in living people that are present in much earlier hominins, and some things that are very unique. Um, its legs are relatively long for its body size. The stature of Homo naledi was between about 145 and 160 centimeters as an adult, and so that's the size of a small-bodied person today. Um, it's not the size of somebody really big like me, but it's the size of many people that you know. And that's not an abnormal size for humans. It is very thin, very skinny, and the joint sizes reflect a relatively small mass for its stature. We think that its mass would have been between about 45 and 55 kilograms. So a little bit light compared to its size, but not crazy light. Um, it has a couple of things that I want to point out on this graphic. It has a flared pelvis. It has a pelvis that in its ilium anatomy is more like an Australopith than like a recent human. So it's Lucy-like. It's like Australopithecus afarensis in that respect. Its shoulders have an orientation which is very clearly cranially oriented. So they're shoulders that are canted upwards like this. And that seems to be well configured for overhead reaching, for climbing. They are not positioned posteriorly and to the side as a human is, or as the Turkana boy skeleton, Homo erectus, is. So they're sort of more built for climbing, and yet they have long legs and entirely human-like feet. Dentally, Homo naledi is really human-like in some respects, with an anatomy that is very primitive in many ways. The size of these teeth, the first molars here, average in size approximately the same as modern humans in sub-Saharan Africa today. So their teeth are human-like in size. The incisors are human in size, if not a little bit smaller than most humans in size. The proportions of the teeth are very different from what we see in any living people. So the mandible that you can see at the right, which is the most complete of the mandibles from the Dinaledi Chamber, this mandible has a third molar that's bigger than the second, and a second molar that's bigger than the first. So the size goes from first to smallest, second bigger, third biggest. No one in the world today has this dimension, right? This is something that we see in Australopithecus. It's not something that we see in Homo. So we have a very primitive aspect combined with very modern size. And this is also true of some of the particular teeth in the dentition. Let me just look and see what I've got next here. Yeah, the premolars, these lower premolars, are very different from any living person's premolars. Early Homo, something like from Dmanisi in Georgia, has a little bit of parallel to these, but really the third premolar here is unique. We don't see other teeth like it in the fossil record. And so again, you have this combination of things that we've never seen with things that are very familiar. Dental development is surprisingly modern. I'm showing you here on the right, this is a mandible of Homo naledi in situ. The teeth are all there, and you can see that the canines are fully erupted. The roots are not quite yet fully formed there. The second molar is erupting, and that's a reverse order from what we see in early hominids. The second molar is erupted as the canines are coming in. And so we have this modern-like developmental sequence combined with a very primitive morphology. So a very odd array of characteristics. Finding this and finding it confirmed in many individuals at the site, more than 2,000 bone fragments at the present time, and more than 25 individuals, told us that we were looking at something that was very new. And so for that reason, our team recognized it as a new species. We named it Homo naledi. Naledi means star in the Sesotho, which is one of the most common official languages of South Africa. It's the most common one spoken in the area of South Africa where we work. So Homo naledi. Okay, at the same time, our team was busy exploring larger parts of the cave system. So this is an overhead map of a large part of the cave system. It shows you some of the complexity underground. You can see that some of those 2 kilometers of passageways are represented here. And I'm showing you here the entrance that we use, which we call now the command center. This is actually during excavations where I sit. And as I'm working, I'm connected with excavators in the Dinaledi Chamber through now the internet. We have telephone lines that run down, but more recently we have internet cable with a router, and we actually have internet going in the Dinaledi Chamber. We communicate with each other through Google Hangouts typically. So we're using off-the-shelf technology. The Dinaledi Chamber is in physical distance about 150 meters away from our entrance to the cave system. It requires a half an hour for our team to go through the cave system to get from the command center, from the entrance to the Dinaledi Chamber. At the same time that our team was working in the Dinaledi Chamber, they began to investigate larger parts of the cave system, exploring for bones. Now, this cave as a whole is not newly discovered. We did not name it Rising Star. The cave has been known for more than 50 years and has been subject to caving exploration throughout that time. Maps of the cave were known. This cave is in an area that is rich in caves and that is well known for fossils. We are less than 800 meters from the site of Swartkrans, which is one of the most famous fossil discovery sites in the world. We are less than a kilometer away from Bolt's Farm, which is a less famous site, but one that is very, very productive in faunal material and in hominids, Paranthropus robustus. We are 2 kilometers from Sterkfontein, right? This is an area where people know that there are fossils, and fossils had never been identified in this cave. So it is a really important sign that exploration underground and exploration of caves is really only beginning. In an area where caves have been known for a long time and where fossil discoveries have been made, the fact is that actually most caves have not been surveyed systematically for fossils. Our team has, for the last 5 years, been working to do that in this area. Our team, including Rick and Steve, the 2 discoverers of these fossils, began to work systematically as part of our project in 2017 to survey sites throughout the cradle of humankind area and to provide records of those surveys and to take records of bone and fossil sites that were in these cave systems. And in the course of this, our team has identified more than 1,200 caves and more than 800 fossil-bearing sites in the cradle of humankind area. Here we're talking about an area that's about 30 kilometers in overall radius outside of Johannesburg and Pretoria, South Africa. So in that area, more than 1,200 cave systems, more than 600 fossil sites. Several of those we now know are hominin-bearing sites. And one of the first of those to be discovered was inside the Rising Star cave system, the chamber that we have named the Lesedi Chamber. As you can see from the overhead map, the Lesedi Chamber is through the cave system about 180 meters away from the Dinaledi Chamber. They are down different passageways. There is no direct connection between the 2. And I point that out because when we began to investigate the fossils in the Dinaledi Chamber, we really did not have any expectation of what we would find there. So it could have been anything, right? When we look at a cave system like Sterkfontein, which is a large cave system that has multiple chambers that have indirect connections to each other, we find lots of different things in Sterkfontein. There is Australopithecus africanus, which is a very famous, type site of that. But we have all kinds of other discoveries, including early Homo, including Robustus, including possibly 2 different species of early Homo. And there's no expectation that fossils are accumulating in all of these different parts of caves at the same time. Caves are complicated. They contain infills that come in at different moments. They change over time. The openings to the outside change over time. What became really clear as we began to investigate Lesedi is that the fossils in this chamber were very similar or identical to the fossils in the Dinaledi Chamber. They are very similar in their preservation. They're very similar in their anatomy. Here you have a couple of images of the most complete of the fossil skeletons from the Rising Star Cave as a whole, and the most complete from the Lesedi Chamber. This is the Neo skeleton. And you can see its skull reconstructed on the left and larger parts of the skeleton on the right. It is a very impressive skeleton. It tells us a lot about the proportions and anatomy of an individual of Homo naledi. But one of the things to really emphasize is that the anatomy of this specimen is identical in every feature to specimens from the Dinaledi Chamber. So we have these 2 cave chambers that are widely separated from each other, that represent, that individuals didn't wander from one to the other, as far as we know, but nonetheless, they preserve exactly the same species, if not the same population. So that's very fascinating. At the same time, we published this work in 2017, and at the same time, we were able to obtain estimates of the dates of the fossils in the Dinaledi Chamber. And I'll just go through briefly. We were really fortunate in the Dinaledi Chamber. Our fossils are in a challenging situation to determine the date. Our excavation to date has extended across approximately 1 square meter of area in the Dinaledi Chamber, and to a depth throughout most of the excavation of approximately 40 centimeters. So we have dug this deep into a space this wide, right? And we have pushed one sondage in that, which is about 20 centimeters in width. We've pushed that down to a depth of about 80 centimeters. So we know a little bit about what's underneath the fossils, but not that much. Our excavations, in other words, have been very minor. And the bone that's been recovered is very dense. Our team is constrained to working underground in relatively short periods. We work underground for about 6 hours in a day with 2 excavators at a time. And we maintain excavation very deliberately and very slowly in that time. You can see what it takes to excavate bone from our situation. And so that means that we're not digging enormous trenches to try to work out the stratigraphy of this. The bone is embedded within relatively featureless sediment. It all seems to be localized in features that are delimited within particular sediment accumulations. And so we're not looking at something that's real easy to date. In addition to that, there is very little or no externally derived quartzes or other kinds of sediment in the Dinaledi Chamber where we're working. The material is very fine particled clay-like material that is largely the mineral decomposition of the dolomite that surrounds this. The larger fragments that are in it are fragments of chert that have been underground since 2.5 billion years ago. What that means is that OSL, the optically stimulated luminescence, which we might apply to most other kinds of sites, is mostly useless in our context. We do have an OSL date from beneath our fossils that can be associated with quartz that seems to have come from outside the cave, and that dates 400,000, so it brackets our fossils at a lower end. The tightest constraint that we have on the fossils at the moment comes from electron spin resonance, ESR, on one of the teeth, or actually at this point, 3 teeth of Homo naledi. That gives us a maximum age of about 335,000 years. And the square that you see here, I don't think I zoom on this next. No, the rectangle that you see at the lower left on this is showing a naledi bone that is actually encased in flowstone. And the uranium series age of that flowstone has a minimum, excuse me, of 236,000. So that tells us that the bones have to be older than 236 and younger than 335. And that tells us the age of naledi, more or less. It's between 236 and 335,000 years ago. Homo naledi, in other words, is sitting in South Africa at the same time that our species, Homo sapiens, is evolving. And that is fascinating. We did not expect this, right? It has the anatomy that we might expect for a hominin that's 2 million years old. And it's not. It existed alongside modern humans as they evolved. That is pretty cool. It raises many different kinds of questions. Here we have a species that, if you reconstruct it in the flesh, is not a human. It looks different from humans in some very profound ways. It has a brain a third the size of humans. It has anatomy that is comparable to early hominins like Australopithecus in many respects. It is not us, but it survived alongside of Homo for most of 2 million years and continued to exist in Africa with Homo sapiens throughout much of the existence of Homo sapiens. Modern humans were on the scene with naledi. So this is really fascinating. We may ask, naledi's got these hands, right? That I've told you look like human hands in most respects. In particular, they have the features of the distal phalanges and the features, the strong thumb, the long thumb, right? All these features we look at in humans and Neanderthals, and we say these are features that are for tool making. And so the question that naturally arises is, did they make tools? The tools that we have in Africa in the same time frame as naledi are known as Middle Stone Age tools. When people hear Middle Stone Age, they often think of things like this incised ochre plaque from Pinnacle Point Cave, or this is from Blombos, excuse me, from Blombos Cave in South Africa. And people think about these kinds of very, interesting, symbolic, possibly artifacts. But in fact, the Middle Stone Age was diverse throughout Africa. This is a shot from Alison Brooks. And in South Africa, or excuse me, in North Africa at the same time as naledi, you see that it has these Middle Stone Age Levallois-based points and other kinds of artifacts. And they're associated with some sort of early Homo sapiens. These are the Jebeler Hood crania from the same site as these Middle Stone Age Jebeler Hood artifacts. In Southern Africa, we also have, at the same time and much earlier, these kinds of Levallois-based points. This Middle Stone Age technology is present in South Africa 200, 300,000 years ago. And the hominin that we have there is Homo naledi. We do not know what the relation of naledi is to these artifacts. They're not from the Rising Star site. We do have some artifacts in the Rising Star site, but we cannot yet associate them with the skeletal material. from the rising star site. So we don't yet know if they're the same age or the same time or same deposition. What we do know is that throughout South Africa, we have Middle Stone Age, and that Middle Stone Age is naledi in age. Ochre is something that's very widespread in the Southern African Middle Stone Age, including before 300,000 years ago. These ochre instances are from Olorgesailie. Olorgesailie is in Kenya. I wanted to point to that because Olorgesailie is famous for an earlier technology, Acheulean. And the Acheulean technology, of course, is widespread throughout many parts of Africa, Asia, India, and Europe. So Acheulean was widespread. Acheulean originates 1.8 million years ago or so, and became widespread. Naledi must have originated sometime by that time. We can ask, did Naledi make hand axes? Did Naledi make Acheulean tools? We don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that at Olorgesailie, in the Acheulean era, 1 million years ago, there is this cranium on the right, the Olorgesailie frontal bone, and this frontal bone is remarkably similar to Homo naledi in many ways. When it was found, Rick Potts and his collaborators called it Homo erectus because it was very reasonable to say, well, we've got something with a brow ridge, it's 1 million years old, and it's not human in size, it's smaller, so maybe it's erectus. In fact, this is very parallel now to the anatomy of naledi. If we found this today, you would have to make a serious question, is this Homo naledi? And I don't know whether it's naledi, but I can tell you that it's what I sort of expect naledi to look like 1 million years ago. And so we might actually be looking at a widespread species. Did Homo naledi coexist with other hominins? The big question is, was it there at the same time in the same place as modern humans? Naledi, if we do its phylogeny, and there's been several attempts at this point, and the mixture of features that we have makes it difficult to to have really clear answers about its phylogeny. But when we do this, we find that it branches somewhere within early Homo. Here you see humans, Neanderthals, and Heidelbergensis all grouped together, and Naledi is an outgroup to those plus antecessor, right? So Naledi is something more primitive than the Atapuerca discovery at Grandolina of antecessor. But maybe it's closer to humans than Homo erectus is. That's one way of placing it with phylogeny. Another way actually makes it much more primitive looking. It places it with Dmanisi. And there are some similarities with the Dmanisi hominids from Georgia that would say, well, maybe Naledi is something like that. We don't know exactly where it goes, in other words, but one thing that we do know is that it should have diverged from us more than 1 million years ago. And what that means is that it must have existed for 1 million years alongside of other forms of hominids. This is a modern human, a skull from a recent African individual. We used to think about modern humans arising and originating from this sort of early modern or early Homo sapiens population, right? So here you have skulls from Africa, including a skull from Ethiopia on the left, the Ethiopia Homo 2 skull, the Singa skull from Sudan, on the right, Laetoli 18 from Tanzania, the sort of early modern 130,000 year ago type samples. And before them, you had something like early Homo sapiens. That's where we clustered Jebel or Hood. It's where you might put something like the Florisbad skull from Southern Africa on the right there. It's where people have put the skull from Ayasi in Kenya on the left. So it sort of used to look like you had these stages, and the earliest stage of this might be something like Homo heidelbergensis, right? Some early archaic African, the Bodo skull is here, the Kabwe skull is here. The Kabwe skull recently redated to around 300,000 years ago. So you have this sort of placement of something that's the same age as Naledi, as an earliest phase of human ancestry. Today we have now naledi in the center of this time period. We don't know where it fits. We don't know how these other things fit together, right? It used to look like you had these stages of African evolution. We didn't have that. We had different branches in Africa. And those branches from genetics today, we can say were complex. So a modern picture of the genetics of today's populations, which you see at the very right of this, and I've named several populations, African populations at the top, sub-Saharan African, and some Asian, European populations in the middle, all the way to Australian populations at the bottom, just to show you a range, a network that diversifies within Africa before 200,000 years ago, that is spreading throughout the world. And as it spreads throughout the world, most of you know that it encounters Neanderthals in the western half of Eurasia and mixes with them multiple times. The Vindhya Neanderthal branch is represented here, the Altai Neanderthal branch. It's mixing with modern humans. And the Denisovans, which are somehow in the eastern parts and maybe South Asia, maybe Southeast Asia, and are interacting with some of these modern humans that are spreading into that area, all within the last 100,000 years. But before that time, it's now very apparent that there are interactions among these groups and that they are repeatedly interacting. So that Neanderthals got their genetics in part from Africans that lived before they, at the same time that they lived. So that the Denisovans and the Neanderthals mixed together and hybridized, that these populations obtained some kind of mixture from even more ancient groups, and that within Africa, we have unknown groups that are very divergent as Neanderthals are, that also mix with today's Africans. Right? This is the genetic picture we're looking at today. The question that we have, right, here's the Denisovans and Neanderthals, excuse me, all the things I just said, I was ready to show you on highlighting here. Here's the mixing in Africa. And the question that we have is whether that mixing is from these archaic Heidelbergensis-like hominins. And if it is, or if not, where these early humans fit in, Jebel or Hood, for instance, is it part of our actual branching, or is it something archaic that's contributed to us? And of course, Homo naledi. We don't know. The answer is we don't know. We cannot match the fossils with genetics in Africa at the present time. We don't have DNA for Homo naledi. We don't yet have proteomics for Homo naledi. If we do get proteomics, it's not obvious that will tell us. And so these are unknown questions. They are questions that we are addressing insofar as we can, but they're the big questions about the relationships that we do not know. Okay, and the final thing I wanted to talk about is mortuary behavior. We have a cave setting in which multiple chambers are depositional locations for hominin material 200 to 300,000 years ago in a sedimentary context, which is unusual and that is devoid of most other species. In the Dinaledi Chamber, we have a few bones of a bird. In the Lesedi Chamber, we have some carnivore material, small carnivore material, that is probably Holocene. It probably does not co-evolve with the hominins. And so we've got these very exceptional depositional situations. It is clear that naledi was using deep parts of the cave system. We can't get naledi into these chambers without naledi going into them deliberately. There is no alternative entrance to the cave chambers at the time naledi lived. And so they were in the deep parts, they were familiar with deep parts, they were using deep parts. At the present time, the question is, was this a deliberate deposition? Were they using these cave chambers to bury their bodies? And if so, how would we document that, right? How do we demonstrate? How do we test it? We are working very hard on excavations targeted at answering that question. I can tell you that our excavations have uncovered more features of Homo naledi, more individual skeleton associations in other parts of the cave system. And some of those parts are extraordinarily difficult for our team to reach. Here you see Marupeng Ramalepa, who's excavating at the base of the chute. And we've excavated the base of the chute on the logic that maybe we were more likely to find material that had been dropped down the chute. And in fact, we have found material at the base of the chute. This is Becca Paixado excavating a skeleton. And it is remarkable what exists there, this feature of bone material that includes a partial skeleton that we've actually removed from the cave in a plaster jacket and are studying now virtually in the laboratory. All of this stuff has been done in the last couple of years, and we're working on now, is with the goal of documenting what the original depositional situation of these skeletons was and whether we can demonstrate some intention to their burial. And it is not easy to test this hypothesis, but that's what we've been working on. Okay, so at the same time, I've mentioned to you the complexity of the cave system, and this within the Dinaledi system, which I'm going to point to in the yellow here at the base, at the bottom of this image. I want to emphasize that we've now surveyed parts of this chamber network and have demonstrated a complexity to it in terms of this passage. You see here the scale of 10 meters. This set of passageways that branches from our excavation unit in the Dinaledi Chamber deeper into that cave system is passageways that are approximately 10 to 20 centimeters in diameter. There are parts of this that our team cannot enter, and there are parts of it that our team can enter only horizontally, shimmying sideways through the widest part of a crack in the ground. And in some of these places, we have made fossil discoveries. So we have fossils in places that are not only, I mean, the Dinaledi Chamber is crazy for our team to reach, but these places, most of our team cannot reach. And when they collect material, and I say collect material because they can reach the ground and document and collect material at arm's length by being suspended horizontally and wedged in the cave as it is, right? There's no excavations in any of these places yet. But we have recovered skeletal remains in these places, including the partial skull of a juvenile individual of Homo naledi. And it's very clear that naledi was in these deep passageways. That is remarkable. And the use and entry into these deep passageways by this very small-brained primitive hominin is remarkable. We don't have a parallel for it before modern humans. And yet we do know that there are many situations in which modern humans with minimal technology, except for fire, except for light, have entered and used very deep, very difficult to reach cave systems. Neanderthals, in a couple of instances, are known to have used very deep parts of cave systems. So this is something that we see in much larger brain hominins, and it's something that's very interesting in Homo naledi. So as our team continues to work, this is Becca Paixado again, excavating a feature that we've identified in the Dinaledi Chamber. As our team continues to work, these are the big questions that we work on. And finding new ways to work in this challenging environment, using new technologies to get more information from the material, those are really our excavation priorities. It is remarkable the extent to which we're able to do things today that we were unable to do in the past. But we continue to rely on the development of new technologies to be able to do more. And so that's what we do, we apply. The wonderful thing about today's situation is because we're all operating remotely now, and I'm remotely talking to you, In fact, the remoteness of our cave system makes it a natural for excavation at this time, right? And so as soon as we are able, we will be back underground and excavating remotely in just the way that we have all along.